Welcome to this episode of WW2 Wayfinder, and I am in the sleepy little village of Hambleden here in England. And you might wonder what the connection with World War II is here. And that's a very good question. Well, if you've seen a series called Band of Brothers, and I suspect if you're watching this channel, there's a good chance you might have done, then Hambledon is the location that doubled for the village of Albourne and the home of Easy Company 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment during the filming of Band of Brothers. Now, in this special episode of World War II Wayfinder, I'm going to look at some of the locations used here in Hambledon for the filming of Band of Brothers, as well as some of the other areas in and around the village of Hambledon here that featured in episode 1 and episode 3 of the HBO miniseries. I've also got a series of photos from the series that we will look to match up and do some then and now comparisons here in the village, so you can see some of the locations and how they appear today in 2024, 20 years after the series was filmed here. Now, one great thing about this whole area in the Chilterns is not a lot has changed in probably 100 years, let alone 20 years. So getting the comparison then and now shots for episode 1 and episode 3 of Band of Brothers is, for a change, really quite easy. So we'll look at the first one, and it's one of the scenes where we see a squad of men marching through Albourne or Hambledon in reality, and the then and now comparison that is in the view behind me is quite a good one. And there's the image from the series. You can see that squad marching down there and a traditional shire horse towing a cart of hay there. Unfortunately, today in 2024, thanks to that tree remaining very much still in place, that's the view as it appears. And other than the modern cars and the street sign, the view is basically the same as what it was 20 years ago when they filmed the series here. So from that first then and now photo, now we'll go to another spot in the village, which is just around the corner from the church, and we could almost see it actually in that first image. But this is a scene where Sergeant Carwood Lipton, or Donnie Wahlberg, the actor who played him, are coming out of their accommodation. They're with another senior NCO as well. Unfortunately, I'm not too sure who the actor is and which character he was portraying, but the location is that gate behind me there. And there's the image, and I think this, instead of being accommodation, because obviously a lot of men of Easy Company in reality in Albourne were billeted in the stable blocks, and we will look at the stable blocks and where they filmed that in the series, but I think this is actually meant to double for the local village laundry. As we can see, the sign there on the right of the image states laundry in the opening times, and then Lipton has got the clean clothes in the brown paper under his right arm there. And the building remains the same. There's a couple of giraffes, a pink creature, and some stuffed monkeys there in the bush now, so slightly different to when they filmed it here 20 years ago, but typical of these beautiful stone houses here in the Chilterns and this whole region. So now we'll look at the scene where Winters is issued his courts-martial paperwork by Evans, and there's a couple of great locations all down this one particular street, all opposite the church, so all very much within the heart of the village here. And here it is. This is the start of that scene where we've got Bill Evans' Jeep driving down here and is about to drop off the paperwork to Winters, who stood with Nixon by the wall of the church. And despite the modern cars, not a lot has changed, although Wheeler's Butchery is actually somebody's house, as we can see now. But we can see the Stag and Huntsman pub there, the building with the yellow and green front to it. That is the same pub or the same sign, sorry, that we can see in the photo from the series. So looking at the scene from where Evan's Jeep is driving down the road, presumably coming from what would be Littlecote Manor, and that was actually here in the village of Hambledon as well, and I'll show you that in a bit. But he then parks up and there's Randleman and a few of the other guys playing basketball against a garage, and that is the building there behind me with the green doors, and we'll look at the then and now photo for that particular scene. And there's the photo of Sergeant Evans there with guys around and Randleman stood next to the garage doors, and again you can see nothing has changed, and it actually transpires that it's a garage to this day, which I think is fantastic. But it's from that scene there where we see Evans get out the Jeep and he steps out, walks over to this location in the village here, literally in one solid movement, where Winters and Nixon are stood, and he delivers to Winters the courts-martial paperwork from Captain Sobel. So there's a couple of photos that I want to look at here. The first is of Winters and Nixon stood up against the wall, and then the next one is of Sergeant Bill Evans coming up and saluting the two officers just prior to delivering the courts-martial paperwork. Now, looking at the stone wall here, you can see that it's all a complete mess of the local stone that's used from around this area to build houses, build walls, etc. So it did take me a minute to locate this particular spot, but after a bit of detective work, probably made the locals wonder what I was doing staring at the stonework here on this wall. But fortunately, thanks to this particular piece here, I have been able to pinpoint the spot where the next two images were taken. Now this one's a little bit hard to match up given the focal length of my camera and the focal length of the camera used in filming, but thanks also to that tree there, we can see this is the spot where the two actors were stood. Now one other thing about this particular scene that I really like is several years ago now, probably 12, 14 years ago, something like that, I was lucky enough to be able to purchase the uniform that we see Ron Livingston, the actor who played Lewis Nixon, wearing in those scenes, his unreinforced M42s. I also have his boots, and it's great to be stood here knowing that this is the spot where he was wearing that uniform that I now have in my collection. And the other image that I wanted to look at here was the one I mentioned of Sergeant Bill Evans presenting Winters with his courts-martial paperwork from Captain Sobel. And a great piece from the continuity guys here. The two actors, Ron Livingston and Damian Lewis, were stood in exactly the same spot because that same identifying stone is exactly where it was in the previous shot. All right, and here it is. Here's the image where we see Evans about to deliver the news to Winters. And again, thanks to that white stone, we can identify that this is exactly the same spot where that scene was filmed. Another very notable scene in episode 1 of Band of Brothers is where Winters and his platoon are carrying out a section attack or a platoon attack, and they come to a crossroads, and he explains to Lipton how he wants his men to take the position here. They're meant to wait for Sobel, but he hasn't shown up, so they decide to put the attack on anyway. And here it is. And probably the most famous star that didn't have a speaking part is that red phone box behind me. This is Colstrope Lane as it heads into Parmore Lane, and it was this area here where we see Winters and his men, and where another notable scene occurs where Winters speaks to one of the elder sort of gentleman of the local area who's on his push bike and is trying to cycle up this way, up Colstrope Lane, as it is in reality. But he sees Winter's men moving all over the place and ends up just speaking with Winters and gives him that famous line saying, "Well, looks like you've captured me now, Yank." That was filmed just behind me here. And the area, surprisingly, unlike Hambledon with its buildings, because this is farmland, it's still very recognisable, but all the hedges have grown up considerably. There was a tree in the image that we'll look at in a second that's no longer there. As I say, the red phone box there behind me really does act as a bit of a fixed marker for this point here at this T intersection. Now, just one point of detail for anybody familiar with the British monarchy and crowns, you'll notice the crown on there is the King's crown or King's cipher, and that's a great bit of detail from the producers, because the crown worn by Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II didn't appear until after her coronation in the 1950s. And then red phone boxes did have that crown on as well. So I'm hoping that when the producers filmed here, that they took that little detail into account with that phone box there behind me. So the first couple of images we'll look at were filmed here, looking down Colstrope Lane back toward the farm that doubled up as the stables for the Men of Easy Company. And here's the first image. It's Winters engaging with the local elderly gentleman, and he's there with his hands up surrendering to him. And the stone wall there just above the elderly gentleman's left shoulder is the one belonging to these houses just here. We can see the vegetation has grown considerably. It must have perhaps been cut back for the filming, but that stone wall is still present. The second image is of them seeing Captain Sobel and his men running up the road, where the gentleman says to Winters, "Oh, would that be the enemy?" And Winters sort of nods in knowing agreement. And that leads us nicely to the next set of images that we will look at from here. From here, walking down Parmore Lane, and that's that lane there behind me, we can see some of Winters' men running over the hedge, or jumping over the hedge behind me there and crossing into the fields here behind me again, where that iconic red phone box is. And there's the shot. It's actually of the elderly gentleman before he turns around and sees Winters coming down the road, but we can see there the 30 cal gun team crossing over. And you can see that road's grown up quite considerably, so much so that the tree in the still from the film, I believe it's there in the distance, but it's quite hard to see, certainly from this position with the hedgerows being so thick. But yeah, you can see a lot has changed in terms of the vegetation growth around these fields in the intervening 24 years. So now just moving back past the laundrette, as it was in the series, alongside the church wall to look at the location where some of the final scenes for episode 1 were filmed. And these are some of the really powerful scenes. This is where we see Captain Sobel being driven out in a jeep, and he's heading to the parachute training school at Chiltern Foliot after Colonel Sink realises that whilst he's been a good training officer, he's not cut out to take the men into the big jump into France as part of D-Day and the Second Front. So he has, for all intents and purposes, been relieved of command, and then that passed on to Lieutenant Meehan in reality. But it was all filmed along the street that I'm now walking along. And Littlecote House down in Wiltshire near Albourne and Ramsbury, where the 506 were billeted. Obviously Littlecote Manor was the regimental headquarters for the 506. 3rd Battalion was billeted in Ramsbury, 2nd Battalion in Albourne along with 1st Battalion. But the building that doubled for Littlecote Manor in the series Band of Brothers is behind those gates there. Now, it's a private home. I don't have access to it. However, it was filmed just here. So you'll have to take my word for it on that one. Sadly, I can't show you, but if you watch the series and then look at the gates, you will recognise them. But then the scenes where we see Sobel driving away in the Jeep and Winters passing him were all shot from around this point here, looking back into the heart of Hambledon village. So those final scenes where Sobel drives past Winters as Winters is walking down the street were all filmed on this section of the street behind me, and it is, for me personally anyway, quite a powerful scene as we see Winters salute Sobel and he just ignores him, looks right through him as a completely broken individual having had his company taken away from him. If we walk down here just a little way, we can see it was just about this location where the scene was filmed. You can see Sobel's Jeep there driving past, going past the laundrette, and not a lot has changed. The only real modern addition is the police cones and that Ford Transit van. And the last image that we'll look at here is of Damien Lewis as he reacts to Sobel driving past him. And I always thought it's a really great scene, especially given that they were in their M42 uniforms in sort of Class B dress with the shirt and necktie on underneath his jacket, and it just looks very smart. And in this particular setting as well, I think it's a set of scenes that have stayed with me since I first saw the series when it premiered, and to be back here seeing them now is fantastic. And there he is, and we can see his white name tape there, which wasn't actually done by the 506, very common in the 502nd PIR, but I think for the series and to help identify characters, it was deemed that it would be worthwhile. And we can see there's cross rifles on his collar, and with the 506, which was sometimes done by various different insignia makers, they would add a unit's number to the cross rifles. Others just wore regular cross rifles to designate that they were infantry, but that's the view in 2024. So with episode 3, after Normandy and they return back to Albourne, there's a great sequence of Alton Moore and Don Malarkey in a motorbike and sidecar that has been temporarily requisitioned, shall we say, from the S4 element of Easy Company, and that was under Captain Sobel, the supply officer. And we see them racing through the village, and it's in this spot we see them approaching head on as they drive up through and then in the direction of the stables. And this is the image, and we can see there Malarkey enjoying a well-earned beer after their time in Normandy. And the view today is that. Now, you'd be surprised, Hambledon's actually a really busy little village. It's just a throughput, I think, for this area, transiting through this valley, heading north. But you can see there the building in the centre of the shot. That's the one in the background of the image. And although the windows have changed, you can still see the chimney and the, well, what is a fairly wonky roof, I suppose, by today's standards. And if I just walk to the right here toward the church, you can get an idea of it. Now, given how busy the village is, it was actually easier to look at the second image in the two that I wanted to look at here. But the image that we see in episode 3 is the one of Moore and Malarkey riding their motorbike and sidecar over the bridge here. It just worked out that filming that scene in the village square there was easier for me to do first, and then to come to the bridge and film this sequence here and show you the area where we see them racing over the bridge before heading into Albourne or Hambledon village. That is how this spot appears today, and it is really rather beautiful. Now, the image from the series is that one, and the shot follows them into the village and then through it and up toward the stables. But it's just great. Or what I do like though is the modern day footpath sign was left in the shot, and that is still there to this day. But what the series doesn't show you is there's this beautiful stream running down here into the valley there. And for anybody who likes wildlife, there are lots and lots of red kites here, introduced back a few years ago and now seem to be flourishing in the area. And it really does look like your quintessential English village. So from here in Hambledon, we'll go and look now at the remaining images, and they are up at the stables that were used to double up as the stables for the ones that were used as billets for the Men of Easy Company in Albourne. But in reality, it was a local set of stables here around Hambledon village that were used in the filming back here in 2000. So I've now come about half a mile, 3/4 of a mile north of the village of Hambledon, and it's in this spot where the farm buildings were used as the stables for Albourne and the Men of Easy Company. And there's a few scenes filmed here, but specifically I'm going to look at the ones where Alton Moore and Don Malarkey, where they ride in on their motorbike and sidecar from having come from Albourne or village of Hambledon all the way up the road there behind me and then to the farm itself. Now sadly, this is the first time I've visited the farm here, and it actually turns out that it's undergoing some major construction work. There is scaffolding all around it, and you'll see that in a second. However, sadly, I can't do anything about that, but you'll still be able to see where they go into the farm, where they park up, and the other vehicles that were there, and get an idea of the scene and what it looks like today, 24 years on from when HBO were here filming it. And here it is. Here is the Albourne Stables, or Colstrope Farm as it's actually known, and this is how it appears today in 2024. As I said, lots of construction work going on here, a lot of renovation work, but fantastic to see it. So the first image we'll look at from here is the one where Moore and Malarkey are on their motorbike and sidecar, and they almost collide head-on with a civilian lorry, or truck to put it in American parlance. And the truck or lorry itself is coming from this direction, and we can see them swerve and then aim for the gate there and to go into the stable block. And that's the view there. It's a little hard to match it up from where I'm stood. The roads around here are surprisingly busy for a very rural area, but that is the approximate spot of where that scene was filmed. So the second and final image from Colstrope Farm, or the stables at Albourne as they were in the series, is of Moore and Malarkey actually riding into the farmyard here, and this one's a slightly easier one to match up. And there it is, we can see them riding in there. Malarkey looking back over his shoulder, probably thinking he's glad to be alive after nearly colliding with that truck. And some paratroopers sat on the wall there with some deuce and a half trucks parked up. And that is the view today, 24 years on from when those scenes were filmed here. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of WW2 Wayfinder, looking at the then and now locations from Hambledon and the surrounding area from Band of Brothers episode 1 and 3. If you're a fan of Band of Brothers and you have the opportunity to come and visit here, I highly recommend it. It's a lovely spot and it's a very quaint English village, so well worth checking out, let alone the filming history that took place here 24 years ago. Okay, thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.